When I was a young engineering student, I was exposed to a quote by Dr. Charles F. Kettering. And Dr. Kettering was quoted as saying that a problem well defined is a problem half solved. That concept was sort of branded in my mind, and I used it for 20 years as an engineer to solve complex engineering problems in corporate America. And I've used it for the last 34 years as a pastor, as a minister, and as a community developer. The whole idea of a problem well defined is a problem half solved. Over the years, there's been a lot of conversation about the war on drugs, mass incarceration, the prison industrial complex, the collateral consequences, a considerable amount of conversation. But very little progress has been made in reducing the prison population in America. Very little problem has been made in actually making a real dent in this whole war on drugs that's happening in our country. And I've concluded maybe because the problem is not well defined, and maybe the problem has been misdefined because we're using improper nomenclature and an improper vocabulary. Words really do matter. They help to shape images. They create a construct and a backdrop for activity. For example, if I say ice cream, it will bring smiles to a lot of you faces because it's a delightful dessert. If I say ice pick, some of you ladies may know what I'm talking about. Most of the men probably would. Something you move large pieces of ice with, or smaller ice picks to break up ice. If I say iceberg, then that sort of brings up a whole different image. And some might think about the Titanic, that massive unsinkable ship that was sunk by an iceberg. Words really do matter. So I think the words that have been used around mass incarceration, the war on drugs, the prison industrial complex, second-class citizenship, is misdiagnosing the problem. Let me explain to you what I mean. When we talk about mass incarceration, it became very popular by Professor Michelle Alexander, a brilliant civil rights attorney who wrote a best-selling book, Mass Incarceration, The New Jim Crow. It's a sexy term, it brings a certain image to you. But let's sort of dissect it for a moment. The masses are not incarcerated. About 2.3 million people in our country are currently incarcerated. That's about 0.7% of 1%. It's a very small number compared to 320 million people that are in our country. Now, there are another 5.2, 5.3 million under correctional control, meaning they're on probation or parole, but it's still not the masses. Instead of saying mass incarceration, I believe the appropriate nomenclature that may educate people a little bit better and gain their support to at least dialogue around this issue, I suggest we talk about over-criminalization. Over-criminalization, the thousands of laws that's been passed in states around the country and federal laws to make minor activity a felony crime. Over-prosecution. If you pick up the newspaper, reading about someone getting arrested, they might have 25 or 30 charges that's been filed against them, many of which will be dropped. But in many cases, the prosecutors are over-prosecuting because they think that's what the people wants. And then that leads to over-incarceration. Judges have made it their careers, along with prosecutors, they're going to keep the people safe by incarcerating all the bad people, and they fail to relate to the public that some 98% of everybody that's incarcerated one day will be released. It is over-criminalization, it is over-prosecution, it is over-incarceration, and that is creating not a collateral consequence, as some might say. When I speak of collateral consequence, it would be collaterally if I were to throw a songbook at the deacon there on the pew. And in throwing the songbook at the deacon, it ricocheted off the deacon's head and hit the deaconess sitting beside the deacon. But I was trying to hit the deacon, not the deaconess. She would be a collateral consequence. But if I threw a songbook at the deacon and then threw one at the deaconess and hit both of them, then she's not a collateral consequence. She's an intended target. So when we talk about collateral consequences for a person to have a felony conviction, we're acting like it just happened accidentally, that it was not intended, and that's not true. Around the country, there are some 50,000 plus laws on the books in states and the federal government that are the intended consequences, intended to be a life sentence imposed on a person committed of a felony crime. It's not coincidental. It's not an accident. It is an intended consequence to create a lifetime of consequences for some person convicted of a crime. So it's important for us to say, no, they're intended lifetime consequences that we the people have agreed to by supporting our elected officials who've passed all these laws. Now take our beloved state of West Virginia. If you look at the West Virginia Criminal Code, you'll find that there are some 523 intended lifetime consequences regarding employment for a person convicted of a felon to deny them an employment opportunity. When you add to that the federal consequences, there are 857 some odd intended lifetime consequences to marginalize and restrict the life of a person convicted of a felony crime. It's not collateral. It is intended. The state of Texas, I think there are over 1,600 intended lifetime consequences for someone committed of a felony crime. And when you look at the map, you'll find the southern states have some of the largest intended consequences for felonies. And when you look at the more larger urban communities, states with urban population, you'll find the same thing. So instead of saying collateral, instead of giving someone an out, no, it's intended. We intend to sentence everyone to a lifetime sentence when they're convicted of a felony crime. So it's not mass incarceration, it's not collateral consequence, and it's not second-class citizenship. We often use that to refer to convicted felons. That's incorrect. After African Americans were free from slavery in 1865, and after they got legal citizenship and the right to vote, in many places they were denied those constitutional rights that the 14th, 15th, and 13th, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment allowed it them. So they were second-class citizens. They were second-class citizens in that on the books they were full citizens, but they were being denied that full citizenship, so they were second-class citizens. But a person convicted of a felon, they're not a second-class citizen. They're no longer a full citizen. They only have partial citizenship because the 14th Amendment of Equal Protection of the Law no longer applies to them. The 15th Amendment, in some regard, of them having the right to vote, in some cases, they lose the right of the franchise for life. In most states, they can get their voting rights restored once they've completed their prison sentence and concluded any probation or parole. But what it means to be a felon, it means that you are no longer a full citizen. You are a partial citizen. The 1866 Civil Rights no longer applies to you. The 1964 Civil Rights Act no longer applies to you. The 1968 Fair Housing Act no longer applies to you. The 14th Amendment no longer fully applies to you because you can be legally discriminated against. You do not have equal protection under the law. So it's important that we point that out. They're no longer full citizens. They're partial citizens. So nomenclature is important to help people understand how severe this is. And what we're doing, we're creating in the United States of America two nations. We're creating a nation of people that have full citizenship, that they got at birth or they received when they were naturalized. We're creating a nation of people that have partial citizenship, that may have been born here or naturalized here, but because they have a felony conviction, they're no longer full citizens. And that nation is growing. It is estimated to be somewhere between 40 to 70 million people. And we're not even keeping an accurate count on it nationally. Larger than Iran or Iraq or just about any country in Europe, we have a nation inside of our nation of second-class citizens. And I think it's making us less safe as a nation. They will be less patriotic, less of a bond to this nation because they have been denied their citizenship. It's restricted, it's limited, it's revoked. Let me tell you how provocative this could be. Let's say we start moving toward a serious immigration reform legislation, and we have somewhere between 11 to 12 million people that's in this country illegally. 40% came in legally with a visa and didn't leave when their visa expired. The other 6% came in illegally and know they were illegal, but they're illegally here. Now, there's some that would suggest that immigration reform that is comprehensive will provide a pathway to citizenship. And so I would suggest if we can provide a pathway to citizenship to people who came here illegally, there ought to be a pathway to full citizenship restoration for people who lost part of their citizenship because they were convicted of a felony crime. That's the conversation I think that we need to start having. Now, this is critically important. I'm an engineer by profession, training, and a minister preacher by calling. But I'm amazed at the lack of understanding of the 13th and 14th Amendments, in particular the United States Constitution, by those in the legal profession. The 13th Amendment of the Constitution is, I believe, the most skillfully, sophisticated, carefully crafted 43 words in the history of the use of the English language in the United States of America. In a marvelous economy of words, 43 words, the architect of the 13th Amendment did something amazing. They abolished the institution of the private practice of slavery that had been in vogue for over 250 years. They abolished it. In the same first clause, 32 words, they then reinstate slavery by saying that the government can practice slavery as a form of punishment. They abolished private practice slavery, then with exception clause say that slavery then can continue to be practiced by the government when used as a punishment for a crime. And then it says that the government has the right to pass laws to enforce that amendment. You look very closely at what happened in the South after Reconstruction. It's exactly what the Southern states did. They repealed the 13th Amendment for many blacks through Jim Crow laws, through convict leasing, where they use the criminal justice system to bring people into the criminal justice system and make them slaves by selling their conviction to a private business concern. This is all documented very, very skillfully and accurately in a marvelous book by a gentleman by the name of Douglas Blackman, Slavery by Another Name. And he shows how slavery was reinstituted in the southern state and remained in effect in 1941 when it was eliminated by Franklin Delano Roosevelt through executive order, because he feared that we'd be embarrassed as we entered into World War II on this high moral ground as the moral conscience of the world, and we were still practicing slavery. So what I'm suggesting, if you look at the 14th Amendment, you find that the amendment says something to this effect. It defines who a citizen is. Everyone born in the United States of America or in a jurisdiction of the United States authority. It defines the naturalization process. Anybody naturalized, you're born here or you're naturalized under the jurisdiction of the United States. Now that was skillfully crafted because in the amendment it says anyone in an area under jurisdiction of the United States. That was purposely put there to deny the Native American citizenship because they were on the tribal lands which are not under the jurisdiction of the United States of America. So the Native Americans, the native people in this country, did not get citizenship with the 14th Amendment. They only get citizenship in the 1920s through the Native American Citizenship Act. In America, citizenship is everything, and having full citizenship is everything to be able to participate in the Republic. And so to marginalize people and to restrict people's participation in the Republic, we've either denied citizenship, revoked citizenship, limited citizenship, or restricted citizenship. And we did that with the indentured servant system, we did it with race-based slavery, we did it with Jim Crow, we did it with convict leasing, and now we're doing it under the auspices of the war on drugs as a way to over-criminalize, over-prosecute, over-incarcerate, but the ultimate net effect is to revoke parts of, limit and restrict the citizenship of those who are convicted, therefore regulating them to the permanent under caste, not class, but caste, with almost no way out. This is a very, very, very serious matter that our country needs to take very seriously, and we as citizens need to understand it. Now, one last item in terms of how I think we could approach this. As a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ, as a pastor, I've come to the conclusion that there are times when a moral argument will not work. A moral argument will not work if you're dealing with immoral people. An argument of fairness will not work if you're dealing with unfair people. An argument of logic will not work when you're dealing with illogical people. So we're at a place in our country where we basically have said, we don't care what you do with felons. They're just almost a non-persons. So a moral argument can be made, I do not believe. A logical argument cannot be made unless you make it economically. So here's the argument I think that we can make to get the attention of powerful people in this country to recognize that we need to rethink this idea of limiting, restricting, and revoking the citizenship rights of people that have committed felons with no pathway for them to ever return. The economic argument is this. There are collateral consequences to this matter. One, it's artificially depleting the size of the workforce. It's artificially depleting the size of the workforce. So that's making it difficult for companies, particularly in advanced manufacturing, to hire skilled workers. That therefore increases labor costs. That therefore makes us less competitive on selling goods and services against the rest of the world where their labor costs are a lot cheaper than ours. There's a loss of production of goods and services if we cannot employ people and run our factories and businesses to the maximum level. Lack of production, lack of revenue, lack of profits, lack of taxes being paid. There's a loss of tax revenue from the felons, right? If they're not working, they're not paying taxes. And therefore, we see this lack of revenue coming from them as well. And there's a perpetuation of generational systemic poverty on behalf of these felons and their dependent children. And therefore, it continues to grow the social welfare program, or at best, make it almost impossible for us to reduce the social welfare program. And then it also destabilizes families, it destabilizes communities, and I suggest that we, over time, are going to destabilize our society. So there's time for us as American citizens who love this country and love this republic to recognize, just as the architects of the Constitution justified race-based slavery and allowed it to continue, even when the brilliant Thomas Jefferson said in private diaries to his friends that if there's a God in heaven, we're going to pay for this. And Jefferson and others said that slavery is unsustainable. In our country today, we're at a place where there's over-criminalization, over-prosecution, and over-incarceration. It's unsustainable. It's taken a toll on us nationally, statewide, and locally. And we've got to rethink it. And the only sensible, sane answer is there has to be a pathway to full citizenship restoration for individuals that have been convicted of crimes, who've paid supposedly their debt to society, who have discharged any probation or parole. They have to be given the hope of one day I can be restored to full citizenship. Therefore, I want to remain law-abiding. I will take advantage of every opportunity so that I, once again, can have the privilege of access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'm out of my time. I thank you for yours.